We want to play for you a little bit of sound from our John Dickerson, who sat down with Donald Trump, and this was for an interview that will air on Face the Nation on Sunday.
Let me ask you about your position on torture. When you and I talked last week, you said that General Hayden was wrong when he said that the military wouldn't follow you on the question of waterboarding and on the killing of terrorist families. In the debate, you said, if I say do it, they're going to do it. You were talking about the military. Then on Friday, you said, I will not order our military to violate those laws.
Well, you never asked me about violating laws, in all fairness. You weren't talking about violating laws. I would say this, look, we have an enemy in the Middle East that's chopping off heads and drowning people in massive steel cages, okay? We have an enemy that doesn't play by the laws. You could say laws, and they're laughing. They're laughing at us right now. I would like to strengthen the laws so that we can better compete. You know, it's very tough to beat enemies that don't have any restrictions, all right? We have these massive restrictions. Now, I will always abide by the law, but I would like to have the law expanded. I would like to make, well, I happen to think that when you're fighting an enemy that chops off heads, I happen to think that we should use something that's stronger than we have right now. Right now, basically, waterboarding is essentially not allowed, as I understand it.
And you'd like it to be if you could expand
I would certainly like it to be at a minimum, to allow that.
The reason that the waterboarding was a number of reasons, but one of them was because the worry was that if America does that, then our soldiers, American hostages, will be treated even worse. That's the argument. What do you think of that argument?
They're doing that anyway. They're killing our soldiers when they capture them. I mean, they're doing that anyway. Now, if that were the case, in other words, we won't do it and you don't do it, but we're not playing by those rules. They're not, why, did somebody tell ISIS, look, we're going to treat your guys well. Would you please do us a favor and treat our guys well? They don't do that. We're not playing by, we are playing by rules, but they have no rules. It's very hard to win when that's the case.
Is that what separates us from the savages?
No, I don't think so. No, we have to beat the savages.
And therefore throw all rules out?
We have to beat the savages.
By being savages?
No, well, look, you have to play the game the way they're playing the game. You're not going to win if we're soft and they have no rules. Now, I want to stay within the laws. I want to do all of that, but I think we have to increase the laws.
All right, just part of the interview that is going to be airing Sunday on Face the Nation with John Dickerson. My panel once more joining us, Steve Chiguera, CBS News, senior political editor in Washington, Leslie Sanchez, CBSN political contributor and Republican strategist, and here in New York with me, Kerry Sheffield, who is the founder of Bold.Global, conservative news and culture site aimed at millennials. Leslie, let me start off with you. On this waterboarding issue, is this a vulnerability for Donald Trump, this sort of back and forth that we've heard?
It's back and forth, and that answer is really almost disturbing. I think John did a very good job of really kind of calling that out, but I think that leaves into question. He says it's not enough. There should be more waterboarding. Here we go down that again. And we could also, of course, think of Senator John McCain here and his response to that and torture. I think there's going to be a lot of conflict. He's going to continue to get resistance on this. And what's interesting here is while he talks about graphically the chopping of heads and how deplorable all of this is, he's not talking about more cohesiveness in the sense of building our intelligence apparatus. You know, what do we need to do with respect to, you know, more intensifying the situation overall in terms of a larger strategy. He is not talking about anything of that. It's just retaliation and those types of tactics. So I think there's a lot missing here, and it will continue to be a point in the press.
You know, just a little bit of context here, Kerry. You know, this is coming at a time when Michael Hayden, you know, former NSA director, among other national security experts, came out and essentially said Donald Trump is not the person who understands this and who can keep us safe. It was a very strong denunciation. How important is this issue of national security to the Republican voters?
Well, I think what he says, his very tough talk on terrorism, is very invigorating of his base. So the people who love for him to use this rhetoric, they're going to love him even more. But I do think he does risk alienating the more moderate people as well as in the general. So, you know, I think that basically his strategy seems to be slash and burn, no matter what you're talking about, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's domestic policy, whether it's how you talk about women, whether it's how you talk about Mexicans, whether it's how you talk about African Americans. So pretty much Trump says you should win at all costs, no matter where it is. And so when he says these really angry and over the top things, he's winning because he's entertaining and he gets that visceral reaction. But philosophically, I just think that that's not the way to win in the long run. That's not the way America has done business to actually win. What sets us apart, as John Dickerson was saying, is that we aren't savage and that we are a country that respects human rights. We are a country that has always risen to the occasion and been that beacon of freedom, who doesn't resort to these sort of tactics that he's advocating for.
Steve, let me turn to you. On this issue of national security, though, if you kind of look beyond this primary and you look to the general election, how does that usually fall? Democrats versus Republicans on national security, but let's say that the nominees do turn out to be Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. This kind of tough talk, or tough talk in quotes, as some people have said, how is that, or could that play out in a general?
Yeah, I think this is a bigger issue for him in the general election than it is in the primary. I think the tough talk is something that resonates with Republicans, with a lot of Republicans, and I think that him being pressed on it is only going to embolden his supporters to suggest that folks are out to get Trump, and so he's just clarifying his answers, and this is not that big of a deal to them. But taking this into the general election, I think it does become an issue because there's a real debate over this, whether waterboarding was torture or whether waterboarding was too harsh. And then, of course, he said, I'd do worse than waterboarding. He's repeated that. So it becomes an issue in the general election. I think this becomes even a bigger issue if there's any kind of terrorist attack between now and November. And the closer you get to the election is really when national security will become a major part of this discussion. And so, as we've seen repeatedly in the last couple of years, if there's a terrorist attack, whether it's in the U.S. or around the world, it becomes a bigger issue for voters. It gets to the forefront of their concerns. And if there is some sort of attack, God forbid, before the election, I think these are the kinds of things that'll get a lot more focus than the economy, than healthcare, than immigration, than some of the other issues. And then you'll really get a sense of where America is overall in this. Will they be more on the side of, say, the tough talk that Trump is espousing, or will they go the other way? I'm really interested to sort of see in a general election context, where people stand on this if there happens to be some sort of attack.
Yeah, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, I did, because I think that it's interesting that Trump was actually caught, he talks about this, I'm very strong against Muslim extremism, yet in the debate, Marco Rubio called him out on the fact that he is quote unquote neutral in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. When we're talking about Hamas, which is a murderous sect, or just leadership group that has in its fundamental charter, its founding charter says, we want to destroy Israel. We hate the Jews. That's not a neutral position for Hamas to be in. So Israel, which is very key to a lot of evangelical voters, Trump has alienated him. His positions have been alienating. So it's one thing, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. And I think that's why a lot of these national security advisors have said, look, Trump is basically loosey-goosey. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's alienating the entire Muslim world. He's alienating the moderate Muslims. When you're saying ban, 1.5 billion people from your country, that offends a lot of moderate Muslims who you need on your side to wage the actual war on extreme Muslims. They're the ones who are the most at risk of Muslim extremism.
Yeah, and Leslie, we've heard from the other candidates on that very issue about the need to not put up these kinds of barriers, that in fact Arab allies, Muslim nations, are going to be needed to help in the fight against extremism, right? I believe I've heard Marco Rubio talk about that.
Marco Rubio, Mitt Romney, Lindsey Graham talked about this. Like, everybody who's not really doing well in this primary so far is kind of the reasonable approach to what needs to happen in terms of a coalition and a national security apparatus that is really functional and effective. But then again, it's kind of to Carrie's point, this primary process is such a populist movement that they want tough talk. They're responding to that. And let's not get, it's like a hostile takeover. Let's not get mirrored in the details. And unfortunately, these are details that really do matter. So the question is, are we going to address them in the primary and vet those issues out, or is it going to be something in a general that becomes a really difficult thing for Republicans to stand by?
I mean, because just, very quickly, just lastly on this point, hasn't this debate over torture, over waterboarding, didn't this country already go through that and decide that was not acceptable?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
Leslie, I guess I'd turn to you on this, because the notion then that he raises it as though it is still within the accepted framework, there was already a debate on the issue of waterboarding.
But Elaine, it goes to the point that among the Trump the strongest supporters, they completely agree to some extent. You can't say all of them agree with everything he's saying here, but they're willing to give that some consideration for his style, because they think ultimately he will go in and shake things up. I think we're all agreeing with that. It's just now we're wondering what that means exactly. More different types of laws I'm going to change. I'm going to equivocate a little bit on immigration, be a little flexible here and there. What are we talking about? I think it's a constant moving target when we're talking about Donald Trump and what he would actually do as president.
Well, I think because that resolution had been achieved on waterboarding, I think that's exactly what his supporters like, is that he's saying that was wrong. That was the establishment, and I'm against that, and I'm going to do something that in your gut should have been done during that debate. And I think that's why he's got such popularity in terms of that issue.